I hope you enjoyed Ed's presentation earlier. Now, we had this session first, which wasn't planned. So we're going back to mine, which is a little bit more general about integrated planning as a method, a system of urban planning. Ed's work focuses a lot on urban design as well as transport planning, especially active travel, although, as you've seen, he relates the physical environment to a lot of social factors. His work is still very broad, but I think integrated planning in general is even broader because it has to do also with infrastructure and not just transport infrastructure or the street network, but things like water infrastructure, energy sources, and so on. So it's even slightly more complex. I will try and be relatively fast. The lecture is about the fundamentals of integrated urban planning. So what I want you to get out of this session is basically to just understand the concept of integrated urban planning and how it is applied in practice. And for this, we'll look at one case study. So I relate integrated urban planning to systems thinking, which I've introduced in the first lecture 2 weeks ago, and understand the difference between traditional urban planning, strategic urban planning, and integrated urban planning. So I hope by the end of this, you will be able to explain yourself the key features of integrated urban planning. I'm not going to test you. And how it produces co-benefits both for society and for the physical environment and for ecosystems as well. So first of all, we've already mentioned the fact that cities are complex systems, and because they're complex, they require system thinking, theoretically, and integrated solutions in practice. So they do not exist in isolation. They are integrated in the wider ecosystem. And they work across multiple systems and sectors. And cities, in terms of administration, municipalities, metropolitan administrations, they work across different sectors in order to deliver urban services. Until recently, however, they have different departments administering cities have worked separately from each other. So they've been working in silos. And what this does is when they address one issue, they tend to do what we often do in medicine, in traditional medicine, rather than holistic medicine, is we tend to address the symptoms, but not the causes of a problem. So, for example, if you work in silos, you might end up with unplanned urban construction, which disregards its connectivity to infrastructure or to services, or how it impacts ecology. And this might cause a number of problems which tend to be, which may relate to the environment, but it may also relate to city life. So they might cause flooding, traffic jams, issues with energy supply, and therefore blackouts, and so on. So the cities who work in silos, where different sectors work separately from each other, tend to have troubles in creating solutions that address not just the existing needs, because troubles, issues are present, but especially potential future needs of cities. So how does this planning system work? In a lot of places, it's still a traditional planning system. And that means it tends to be focused on a city plan, and often it doesn't integrate social or environmental issues. Often it is not compatible with public concerns or values, meaning that it doesn't address a future vision of a city. And it tends to be weak in implementation because it doesn't include a dialogue with the community. So, for example, a couple of criticisms of the traditional urban planning system is that one good criticism is by Roderick Lawrence, which said that the traditional urban planning model tends to overestimate the ability of the model to predict and control the environment, because it relies on the consequences of past trends and emerging conditions to give projections of future accounts. But it does not take into account more meaningful or inspirational views of what the future is going to be. So basically, it doesn't have a vision. It's sort of focused on practical matters of the day. Another good criticism, which is included here, is by Berg, which criticizes the rationalism of urban planning, so the idea that it can control things through a functional system. And basically, its main criticism is that it doesn't incorporate the aspects of consensus building, and participatory models, which would enable a city to be designed in a way that meets the needs of the users. So, differently from this, integrated urban planning tends to cut across disciplines. And I don't want to do this. Hold on a second. So the main aim of integrated urban planning is essentially to identify opportunities to solve problems holistically. It is inspired by systems thinking, and it treats different fields of operation to address not only current needs, but also future requirements. To meet these requirements, it needs to address a consistent and rational use of energy and key fields of operations, like urban mobility and energy supply, along with efficient energy consumption and a well-balanced use of available space. So this must really be treated and developed jointly. And the focus should really be a common energy objective, so the resources are shared equally and do not impact the environment endlessly. So the challenge for integrated urban planning is to organize our lived space, our cities, in a way that the functions strengthen each other, and have the opportunity to develop and not get into each other's way. So make sure that something that you do doesn't negatively impact on something else. So it's a modern planning approach. It's relatively recent and is closely connected with the complex nature of cities and the necessity of creating sustainable and resilient settlements. So while urban planning concepts are complex, integrated urban concepts are complex, they must also meet the local situation and the local context. So in the image, in the slide, you have a integrated neighborhood strategy, which was developed in the Netherlands. So the reason why they decided to focus on the neighborhood is that integrated urban solutions tend to be particularly noticeable at this scale. So each field of transition, and by transition I mean the transition towards sustainable development, directly affects the local scale, because at the local level in neighborhoods, space is scarce and the interests of the residents diverge from each other. So whenever you make a decision, different people get affected in different ways. So when they make a plan for a neighborhood, they use the integrated framework by which to support those who are involved, including the communities, in identifying and sort of balancing different interests and different opportunities. When it gets implemented at a larger scale, such as a city scale, the idea is that this same approach enables a better coordination between multiple neighborhoods. So if you apply the same framework, say how a neighborhood interest might diverge or might be different from the one next door, then it also makes municipal and sort of national level planning easier to be realized. So the key features of integrated urban planning are what we call vertical integration. And this happens when there is alignment across different levels of government. So, for example, between a city government and between the national government. So the policies are aligned and they support each other. The second feature is horizontal integration. And this is when there is alignment between urban systems at the metropolitan scale, so at the city scale, like connecting multiple infrastructure sectors, such as transport, water, land use, and energy. So this is the alignment between different sectors and different infrastructures. The fourth characteristic is natural and human systems integration. So this really refers to the synergies between the built environment and the natural ecosystems within which cities are embedded. And finally, social integration, which refers to planning for inclusive cities, which we have discussed last week. And this is about bridging city systems and service for those who are most in need, so the lower income groups, marginal groups, with the city as a whole. So this is the whole idea of the integrated neighborhood strategy, is about balancing all these aspects. Now, I'll mention health again. Ed has also mentioned health in his work quite a few times, and we discussed it last week with Marcus. And this is a framework which was developed by Helen Pineo, who was at UCL when she developed it. She's moved to the US now. If you remember the framework that Marcus showed last week, the health map, this is kind of an evolution of that framework. It's much more recent. In Marcus' diagram, people were at the center of the diagram. The key difference in this one is that Helen reversed the perspective and actually has put the planet at the center of the diagram. And here you can see, obviously, all the different elements that relate to our work as planners and designers at different scales, from the smallest of the building through to the largest neighborhood, district, city, and region. The reason why she reversed it is because we know that our capacity to retain our health is basically limited by the planet's capacity for its own health. So without these at the center, it is basically impossible to retain our own health. So she reversed the perspective somewhat. But basically what the framework is called thrives towards healthy urbanism, inclusive, equitable, sustainable. And those are essentially the three pillars. What do these mean? For her, inclusivity is about enabling all members of society to participate in daily activities. Sorry, let me get rid of the... To participate in daily activities without feeling that they are disadvantaged by their personal characteristics or needs. And this usually is achieved through participatory processes, but it translates in urban planning as delivering inclusive urban environments, which represent both an outcome that we should aim for, but also a process to follow. So you cannot achieve an inclusive urban environment unless the process itself, the process to design it, is itself inclusive. When it comes to equity, this is about giving access to health-promoting environments to all residents, and specifically considering and seeking to reduce barriers to access. Access to services, access to social infrastructure, and so on. These barriers could be physical, they could be cultural, they could be social, or they could be economic. So I think this links back to Ed's presentation, in the sense that this is about us planning and designing health-promoting environments. This means creating the conditions for people to be healthy. It doesn't mean that, as it says, we cannot guarantee the actual outcome of people being healthy. But as I say, it's if we do this, everything else being equal, on average, everyone's health will get better. Sustainability is about supporting the needs of the current and the local population, but without compromising the needs of the future population or the spatially distant populations. So especially when it comes to energy resources, we cannot only take into account the needs of the individual household or the neighborhood or the city or even the nation, because that might mean that we are drawing resources from another community very far away from us. So that also needs to be taken into account. Okay. So this is just to clarify the difference between different systems of urban planning. The traditional urban planning tends to be centered around a master plan which guides growth and development, and often is focused about land use planning. These may be more or less spatial. Often in a lot of countries is still zoning, residential areas, commercial areas, and so on. or it may be more spatial in the way that Ed showed in his master plans that it relates to the characteristics of the street network. Strategic urban planning is derived from strategic planning in the corporate world. So the traditional one is based on a rational theory. Strategic urban planning is about setting specific short-term and long-term goals, while integrated urban planning is derived from systems thinking. So it's about identifying multiple causalities between different elements in a system. Traditional urban planning is centralized, both strategic and integrated tend to be bottom-up, so targets are set based on users' needs. Traditional urban planning is product-oriented, so it's about producing a plan. And again, this is the example that Ed was giving. You told to transport planning and they say, we're going to build so many miles of railway, or you're talking to housing and we're going to build so many housing. But this is an output. It's a product. It's not an actual outcome. Strategic urban planning tends to be more holistic and does tend to have a vision. What do we want our city to be? What do we want our neighborhoods to be? But integrated urban planning goes a little bit farther, and it tends to align both the horizontal and the vertical elements to balance natural and human systems, to meet the needs of humans without exceeding planetary boundaries. So the first one is implemented by directives, guidelines, policies, while the others tend to be implemented by empowerment, so policymakers taking on what people visions are. And then the first one is largely based on data, which I think is really very important. But additionally to that, the other two models tend to, strategic tends to involve a dialogue with stakeholders, while integrated tends to do inclusive stakeholder engagement from the beginning of a process. And finally, traditional urban planning, it's usually focused on a specific scale, while integrated urban planning usually looks at a larger geographic area. So even if you're working on a small scale, like a neighborhood, you tend to try and understand the impacts on a larger scale. So why should we do integrated urban planning? Central to integrated urban planning, as you know by now, is the collaboration between sectors, and it's not so much about negotiating between different sectors to sort of reach a bargain, drive a bargain and find the middle ground, but is aimed at finding the maximum value for all the sectors. So it's sort of driven by a determination to add value to every piece of infrastructure that we deliver. So this goes back to the idea of co-benefits. So the complexity of the challenges that are faced by city means that the added value of solutions lead to multiple benefits for different sectors and at different scales. So the key sectors in this diagram are energy systems, because to transition to sustainable energy systems, we must reduce energy consumption, generate energy from renewable sources, and reuse energy waste. So, for example, combining housing developments, so combination of infrastructure with housing developments can be made to produce energy saving potentials, for example, through deep renovations and so on. And then it can be aligned with efficient mobility solutions. Mobility is about improving intermodality and good public transport services, which relates both to private transport, not private in the sense of a car, but personal transport, and also the transport of goods and services. And these doing mobility, effective mobility solutions need to be aligned with land use planning. And finally, land use planning. In order to do efficient land use planning, you need to make an efficient use of space. So this is increasingly necessary. So in order to create sustainable urban systems, you need to have a good understanding of mobility and energy systems in order to plan for land uses. So this is kind of, they're all interlinked together. And all these themes have a considerable impact on livability, health, and inclusivity. The case study, it's aptly titled Greater Than Parts, which sort of reflects the idea of systems thinking and integrated urban planning. So it's about Mexico City. Mexico City is a mega city, as you probably know. And back in the early 90s, air quality in Mexico City was really, really bad. It had probably the highest levels of pollution in the world. So the city administration started a program called ProAir, and we are now in the fourth phase of the program. So it's been going on for a long, long time. He was aligned with the national government policy, because the Mexican government in the 1990s also created 4 comprehensive programs against air pollution. And these have become increasingly ambitious over time, and also include strategies for transport, planning, environmental education, and reforestation. The program is led by Mexico City, and it's in collaboration with the Metropolitan Environmental Commission, and it involves 5 academic institutions, 7 business associations, 20 local, 6 state, and 10 federal governments, plus 1 healthcare secretariat, and at least 10 NGOs. So you can see how it was very important to work across sectors in this case. They had 3 project goals. The first one was to improve air quality and reduce ozone concentration levels, which were very high at the time. Reduce health risks from air pollution, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So the third phase of a policy, which was in the 2000s, drew a lot of investment both from public and private funding. And there were more than 80 initiatives in the third phase. These included closing the most polluting industrial facilities, as well as improving public transportation to decrease vehicles emissions. So I was saying 80 initiatives in phase 3. And these included expanding the subway system, launching a suburban train system to serve the sprawling metropolitan area, they started the largest bike share program in Latin America, which is called Ecobici, and they launched the Metro Bus, which is a rapid bus transit system. And this now carries over 1 million people each weekday. We are now in the last phase of the program, ProAir 4, and this includes 81 measures and 116 actions across 8 themes. So this is really about the fact that the region took joint action in collaboration with the federal government and built a programmatic approach, meaning a long-term strategic and integrated approach to solve the air pollution problem. What have the impacts been? Now, particulate pollution, essentially air pollution from particulate matters, has declined by over 60% since the introduction of the policies. Now, air pollution in Mexico City is still high. But it's similar to the levels that we find, for example, in Milan or Warsaw. This in the 1990s, it was similar to those in Calcutta, for example, or the most polluted areas of China today, which have increased in air pollution and which have very, very high levels nowadays. There were multiple co-benefits which are listed here. So the idea is that these have benefits both for climate and for health, and in particular in terms of health and life expectancy. This is being calculated as a difference of 3.3 years of increase in life expectancy for the population. We are running late, and I want to leave enough time for the final lectures. So just a couple of final slides which list the enabling conditions for integrated urban planning, this alignment between national and local policies, data availability, which is an issue in a lot of countries, and it certainly is here in Cyprus. We do not all have the same data that the UK has, but there are ways of dealing with this. It's not an excuse. Trust and community engagement, leadership, stakeholder collaboration. Not all these enabling conditions are present in all cities. In most cases, most cities do not have all of them, but this is really not an excuse not to do integrated urban planning. Rather, cities should identify the enabling conditions that they already have and sort of build upon these while they develop the others. And there are also some barriers which are some kind of the opposite of the enabling elements. Institutional barriers, policy norms, cultural norms, data challenges, which are mentioned. And financing. Financing is a really important one, actually, and that is because most of the fastest growing cities in the world actually have the smallest budget to meet growing demands for public services. Financing is an issue.